Welcome to 50 Plus in Montgomery County, a monthly program that is a voice for many, produced by the Commission on Aging, of which I am a community member. This show is insightful for people of all ages, and each episode takes a fresh look at important issues by spotlighting older adults in the community, representatives of services and programs, and activities of interest to older adults. My name is Katie Smith. On this month's show, we're going to talk about bird watching. Here to have that discussion with us is Gabriel Foley. Gabriel is the director of the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership. Hi, Gabriel.
Hi, Katie.
How are you today?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Let's jump right into our first question. Gabriel, as you know, every day millions of people around the world enjoy watching birds and recording their sightings. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into bird watching.
I got into birding when I was a kid. I grew up on a farm actually up in Canada and was just, I was always one of those like outdoorsy, nature-loving kids. My mom would find like frogs in my pockets and things. And I didn't realize that like bird watching was a hobby that people did until I met a fella named Terry Sprague. And he was kind enough to answer emails from me. I'd see something like a yellow warbler, and I'd be like, "Hey, Terry, I just saw a yellow warbler. Like, is that rare?" And he'd reply and he'd be like, "Oh, it's always exciting when you see one. They are pretty common, but that doesn't mean like that you can't be just as excited about them." And yeah, he really helped feed my enthusiasm for birds and kind of made it my career now.
That's amazing. That's amazing. From carrying frogs into your pockets to bird watching.
My poor mother.
All right, then. Tell us why, many people bird watch, and you know so much about it. I've heard about a breeding bird atlas, but why is it important to have a breeding bird atlas? And if you could just give the viewers and as well as myself a brief history about the Maryland slash DC breeding bird atlas and maybe its evolution from the first to the third atlas.
Yeah, yeah. So of course, birding is something that you can do completely for fun. But then there's also science components to it where you can take your observations and you can make them useful for conservation. And one of these projects is what's called an atlas. And an atlas is a mapping project, right? You can have like a road atlas or a world atlas. You can also have a breeding bird atlas. And it basically maps out the breeding birds, in our case, here in Maryland and DC. And so the great part about it is that all of the data are completely collected by volunteers. So we had like 2,500 people participate over the last 5 years, mapping out the distribution of all of our breeding birds here. We overlaid the whole area with this grid of 3 by 3 mile blocks,
Mhm.
and observers would go into all of them, like 1,300 of them, and they would record all of the breeding birds that they could find. And so we have these great maps showing us in really fine detail where birds occur across Maryland and DC. And these atlases, they're repeated too. So about every 20 years, they're redone. So we can take this snapshot of the bird populations in Maryland and DC, and we can compare it to what it was like in the 2000s, what it was like in the 80s, and we can see how things are changing over time.
That's amazing. I like that progression and then, being able to do the look back. Right. You said anybody can bird watch. Well, how can someone get started with doing that?
It's really easy. I mean, all you really have to do is watch birds. And the great thing about birds compared to a lot of other animals is how accessible they are. I mean, basically everywhere you go, you will find birds. You can even go into like a Home Depot or an airport sometimes and find birds inside.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, you want to go outside to find the birds. You can attract them to your home, of course, with bird feeders. But the things that you really want to have if you're kind of keen on learning to go birding is to have a pair of binoculars and a bird guide. Bird guides can be, I've got a couple here. They can be paper form, but
Hmm.
they can also be on your phone. And there's some really great resources that will actually help you with the identification process as well.
Wow. Is there training requirement, a requirement to that? Like I know you said all you need is binoculars and the pamphlet, but do you need any sort of, prerequisites?
You don't need it. I mean, birding is it's just fun. As long as you respect birds and you respect people, like you can't do it wrong.
Mhm.
But if you want to really make sure that your identifications are correct, then yeah, it definitely helps to have somebody kind of coaching you along.
Mhm.
In Montgomery County here in Maryland, there's actually the Montgomery Bird Club.
Hmm.
And it's full of folks. When I moved here, they were some of the first people that welcomed me into the birding community here and helped show me around. And yeah, they're great folks.
Wow. All right. So the Maryland Birding Club, let's just, pretend, if you will, that I'm a member, a new member. What are some simple steps that I should follow or that should be followed for birding?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things that a lot of birders really enjoy is kind of the keeping track of all the different birds that they've seen. A lot of birders keep track of the birds that they've seen across their life, or maybe during the year. A lot of people keep different lists for different places. So a lot of people find a lot of enjoyment in keeping those kind of checklists.
Mhm.
And that's great if you want to do that, and it's great if you don't want to as well. If you want your observations to be used for science, there's multiple different places that you can record your observations where scientists can use them. But some of the most important information to include would be the date that you saw a bird and the location. And it also helps if you have some information about like how much time you spent looking for birds. You can
Mhm.
imagine that you find a lot more birds in an hour-long walk than in a 5-minute walk.
Right, 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 right. Okay, what are some of Gabriel, the best resources? I know earlier you mentioned, you could just have a bird feeder in your backyard, or some people might have a bird bath, but what are some of the best resources that you recommend?
Yeah, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has some great resources. They've got a whole section called All About Birds. And if
Mhm.
you go onto the internet and you search all about birds, that will be the first thing that will come up. And it will give you information about what kind of feeders are best for your area and for the birds that you want to attract, and some helpful tips about keeping things that you may not want to feed away, like squirrels, and give you tips about like how to keep your feeders clean and that sort of thing.
All right, we're gonna keep walking this fictional story of me being a bird watcher through. So I joined the Montgomery County Club. You've told me about, having binoculars, a map. I've spent, more than an hour outside at one of the Montgomery County parks, and I've recorded, as you said, the location and the date. Now, as a bird watcher, now I'm local, what should I do with my birding observations?
So I think the easiest thing to do is to use one of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's apps or their website. Um, it's called, you can use one of two. One is eBird, and eBird is like if you're pretty serious about it, like
Mhm.
if you want to record more information about your sightings, you would go for eBird. The other option is Merlin. And Merlin is actually so great, especially as you're getting into things, because Merlin helps you identify birds. It can take a picture and tell you what that bird is, or, and this is my favorite part, it can actually listen to the birds that are singing, and it can tell you what the bird songs are. And
Wow.
that's so helpful because sometimes you're hearing stuff and you might not even notice that those songs are happening. But when you have a list of 6 or 8 species on this Merlin app, all of a sudden you can start listening for those. and it can help
Mhm.
you key into them and pick them out. It's great.
Wow, that's amazing. I won't test it out. I don't have the song in me. Are there other uses? You mentioned apps, but are there other uses of technology that help bird watchers as well?
I mean, a lot of birders, I guess, we have our binoculars, but we also go for spotting scopes. So
Hmm.
binoculars give you like um, they'll give you like about an 8 or 10 times zoom on what you're
Hmm.
looking at, to bring it 8 or 10 times closer. But spotting scopes can bring that all the way up to like 60 times. So if you're
Wow.
really serious and you want to look at things like distant ducks or shorebirds or something, um, having a spotting scope can really help with that.
Hmm. You mentioned this a little bit earlier, but if we could just circle back to it again, what data locations should be preserved?
The data locations.
So if I'm in Montgomery County parks, like, am I saying a specific park that
Hmm.
I'm in, or what what should be preserved there?
Oh, that's a great question. You can make it as precise as you want it to be. The more precise, the better, really. One of the nice things about using an app is that a lot of these apps, if you turn the permissions on, will actually track your location as you are bird watching. And
Mm,
so you can submit a location for, say, Wheaton Regional Park.
mm,
And okay, that tells me that you were somewhere in Wheaton Regional Park. But
mhm,
if you have the tracks turned on, then scientists can take that and they can say, oh, okay, you walked through this stretch of forest while you saw these birds. So it can be
mm,
very fine scale.
mm. So during our conversation so far, we've used two different words to talk about bird watching. We've said birding and atlasing. Is there a difference? And if there is, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, yeah. Birding is kind of like the general term. If you just enjoy watching birds, whether it is just at your feeder in your backyard or whether you travel all across the state to go look for different birds, then that's birding. Atlasing, on the other hand, is a particular form of birding where we're specifically trying to find breeding birds for this mapping project. So the idea really is that you go out and you go into a particular sampling unit, one of these 3 by 3 mile blocks that are in part of a grid across the state, and you're looking for as many different breeding birds as you can find. The key difference here is that birding is just more about keeping track of the species that you find and just watching them. Whereas atlasing is more about the behavior. You have
Mhm,
to know whether the bird is breeding or not. And the best way to do that is by paying attention to what the bird is doing.
mm.
And so it actually forces you to really slow down. You have to watch a bird for a little while to figure out what it's doing. And yeah, it's a different mentality of birding.
Got it. Sort of like the singing that you mentioned. All right. You mentioned Wheaton Regional Park in one of your responses, but what are the best birding hotspots? I guess in Maryland, but since we are in Montgomery County, specifically Montgomery County.
Yeah, Wheaton Regional Park is terrific, especially during spring migration.
Mm,
It seems to bring in a lot of the really tiny, brightly colored warblers in the spring. You
mm,
can get 20 different species on a good day there. It's really remarkable. One of the other great places in Montgomery County is um, McKee-Beshers Wildlife Management Area, kind of in the southwest corner near the Potomac. It's got a variety of different habitats and a lot of different species there, and it's pretty accessible.
mm. That's really good. I like the accessibility part. Um, well, Gabriel, you've given us a wealth of information. Tell me this. You mentioned anyone can be a bird watcher and they can do it in their backyard. How do you make the environment in your backyard bird friendly?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, feeding birds really helps. Having some water available, that can really
Mm.
help draw them in. If you have a bath and you add a drip to that, some birds find that completely irresistible. And yeah, that dripping action, they love it. But of course, you want your backyard to also be safe for birds and to be a good habitat for them. So keeping those feeders clean, that's important. You want to make sure that birds aren't hitting your windows. If they are, then you want to put up some they're little dots that go on your windows or some tempera paint on your
Mhm.
glass. That can really help reduce the window collisions. You also want to make sure that, there's insects available in your backyard.
Mhm.
So reducing the use of pesticides is important. Having native plants that grow in Maryland and that the insects here actually use, that's also really important. And then keeping your cats either on a leash or inside, especially during the breeding season when you've got these vulnerable baby birds out there. That's also really important.
What I hear you saying is that we need to preserve the ecosystem and continue to build that.
That's right.
Well, seasons change, Gabriel. With that, what are the different types of birds that one would see in different seasons? Take us through the four seasons, if you will.
Yeah, well, we're in winter right now, so it's a lot of the seed-eating birds right now. We've got lots of cardinals, lots of juncos, white-throated sparrows around. You can still find ducks if you head to water that's not frozen right now. It's been so cold.
Mhm.
But in a couple months, it's going to be spring migration, and all the birds that are currently hanging out in the tropics, they're going to come back up here for the nesting season. And for birders, that tends to be the most exciting time of year. You get to see all of the birds that are coming through Maryland to go further north. You get all of the birds that are gonna stick around here and nest. And then you never know, you might get some wacky lost bird who got, turned around during migration and wound up in Maryland. Um, and so once migration wraps up, we have the breeding season, and then the fall migration begins in like August, September-ish. All those birds go back down south, and then we're back into winter.
Nice, very nice. I think I like the wacky bird that just lands somewhere. That brings me to another question. How can we make bird watching, especially for the person that's not doing it professionally or to do atlasing, a family activity? And I'm curious, is this something that you also share with your wife?
Yeah, my wife and I do this together all the time. Birds are actually how we met. It's completely a family-friendly activity. Um, the young kids may not always be the most intense birders, but everybody appreciates birds, especially big, cool-looking birds.
Mhm.
You mentioned the wacky birds. There was a couple years ago, we actually had wild flamingos land in Pennsylvania, just north of the Maryland border. And like now that's a wacky bird. Hundreds of people came to see these flamingos standing in a Pennsylvania farmer's field. Any kid is gonna love to see that. But there's also, man, ducks. Ducks are underrated. They're pretty cool. And just the treasure hunt for different kinds of birds can be so exciting.
Yeah.
Um, there's also plenty of places where you can go that are, like I mentioned, Wheaton Regional Park. That
Mhm.
is that's a great place to go with kids. When the birding dies down for the day, you can easily switch it over to the other things that you find at the park. So yeah, it goes along nice.
I definitely want to ask you this question. Just thinking about the bigger picture. I know you said that this could be done for fun, or a lot of people actually volunteer to do atlasing, watching the behavior of birds. But thinking a little bit bigger and deeper, how does bird watching, help make a difference with science and conservation strategies?
Yeah. So one of the great things about birds is that they're abundant, they're easy to find. There's a lot of different kinds of them that all have different niches in the environment. And there's a lot of people who are interested in watching them and reporting them. All of
Mhm.
this combines together to make birds a really excellent monitoring tool for the environment. You
Mhm.
have volunteers who are able to collect the data, and you have species that are pretty good indicators of how the environmental health is doing. So, especially if you can track it over time, you can have a pretty good picture of the state of environmental health in a region.
That's great. Now, what resources are available in Maryland, and how can someone volunteer to become a bird watcher?
If you're interested in participating in some of the science projects, then the organization that I'm part of, the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership, is a great place to find out more about that. If
Mhm.
you're just interested more in just watching the birds and just kind of want to do it for fun, then reaching out to the Montgomery Bird Club would be a great place to start.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, I definitely want to I have two more questions. This one's is a little bit more connected to current events. In light of the bird flu or avian flu, is there any special care that should be taking as people are bird watching or atlasing?
Yeah, so the bird flu is definitely a big concern right now. It primarily affects waterfowl and raptors, and then of course poultry. If you have chickens in your backyard, you need to be especially careful. If you're hunting, that's another big thing. If you're just generally birding, then the risk is pretty low, even if you're
Hmm,
feeding the birds. As of
okay.
right now, the risk is pretty low for songbirds.
Mhm.
So you should feel free to, continue going out for your birding walks or to continue feeding the birds in your backyard. If you have chickens, you probably want to stop feeding birds, but otherwise you're okay. One of the big things though, and this applies anytime, is to keep your bird baths and your bird feeders clean. Uh,
Hmm.
Cleaning them every couple weeks is enough, and you just want to use um, some water with a little bit of bleach added into it. About 10% bleach is good, and yeah,
Okay.
clean.
So it sounds like a little bit, there's maybe a few capsules.
Yep.
Okay. Well, finally, before we wrap, you said you're a bird enthusiast. You've been doing this for a very long time, bringing your skills down that you learned in Canada and from your mentor. And I took it, from frogs to birding, since you mentioned that story about your mom. But, what is rewarding to you about bird watching and being an avian enthusiast?
When I go out and I watch birds, for me, everything else just kind of disappears. And I'm just able to, that's just the thing that does it for me. I totally
Mhm.
relax. One of the other things that I love about it, other than just getting to watch these little bundles of feathered joy, is they're everywhere. Birds are everywhere, but there's different birds in different places. So if you're
Yeah.
interested in birds, birds take you to the most unexpected places when you're trying to find them. If you want to go see this one particular bird, well, you might have to go to a place where you would never have visited otherwise. So
Mhm.
it's a great way to explore places in an unexpected way.
I love that. It's a great place to explore faces in an unexpected way. Gabriel, that was my final question. Do you have any final words that you'd like to share, or just maybe mention something else that you wanted the audience to definitely remember about bird watching?
The most important thing is just to enjoy it.
Mhm.
And I said it earlier, respect birds, respect people, and you can't do it wrong.
Love that. Well, that concludes our program for today. As you can see, the voices of those 50 plus matter every day and in every way. To learn more about services for seniors in Montgomery County, please visit the Montgomery County Seniors website by visiting montgomerycountymd.gov/senior or call the Senior Resource Line at 240-777-3000. And as always, thank you for watching 50 Plus in Montgomery County.